session is scheduled to go until 4:30 or 5 o'clock, depending on how lively the debate is, so we're in your hands on that. We've got, for the first time really, a debate at World Travel Market on World Responsible Tourism Day. It's an experiment. If we make a mess of it, we probably won't be allowed to do another one. If it goes well, I hope we'll have future debates in subsequent World Responsible Tourism Days. We've got two lead protagonists for this debate. We've got Richard Sharpley from the University of Central Lancashire, who is going to speak really from a different perspective, from a critical perspective, I hope, Richard. And Luke Pollard, who's here from ABTA, is going to be leading the group talking about the benefits of tourism to the world. And the question we've posed is, who benefits from tourism? Who are the primary beneficiaries of the tourism that takes place around the world? I think it's a very important debate. It's come up several times during the day, and I'm certainly looking forward to what you have to say and what the people on the panel have to say. Now, the way it's going to work is that Richard is going to go first and lead off with his critique of the role of the tourism industry, and he's got two expert witnesses. He's only got one at the moment, but he will have two, I hope. He's got Julia Bishop from Zanzibar and Adam Abbar, who many of you will know, who I hope is on his way here, and he's from the Gambia. So Richard will speak first. He'll then ask some questions, some friendly questions, no doubt, of his two witnesses, his two expert witnesses, and then Luke, from the opposite side, will be allowed to ask 2 or 3 questions of Richard's witnesses. We will then go to Luke, and he will make his presentation. He'll ask a couple of questions of his two expert witnesses, and we have Ruth Holroyd from Thomas Cook and Noel Josephidis from Somerville. And when that's over, we'll then come to the floor and ask for your engagement in the debate by asking questions. Now, the motion that we have before us is that this House believes that the main beneficiaries of tourism are the industry and the consumers, and that there is too little benefit for communities and their environments. And what I wanted to do, in order to have some fun, really, at the end of the day, is to get a vote from you, the audience, before you hear the debate, about your view on that proposition. So I'm going to read you the motion again, and I'm going to ask you to vote on it. And then, no doubt, we'll debate how many people have voted each way, but at least we'll have a sense of where the balance of opinion in the room is. And I suppose, just like Jonathan Dinwoodley, I should say this is not a scientifically selected audience, and it's not representative of anything except the people in the room. But it will be interesting to see. So, the question I want to ask you is, the motion is, this House believes that the main beneficiaries of tourism are the industry and the consumers, and that there is too little benefit for communities and their environment. How many of you agree with that proposition? And how many of you disagree with that proposition? Come on. How many of you don't know what you think? Okay, it looked like about 50% of the people in the room agree with the proposition, and about 3 very brave people don't. And of course, Richard and Julia, and there are a lot of hands which were clearly undecided. So, without further ado, Richard, I'd like to welcome you to come and put your case for why tourism benefits the industry and consumers more than it does destinations and communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Forgive me for reading part of this out, but I want to get some key points across to try and explain where I'm coming from with this. So first of all, let me start by stating, perhaps curiously given the motion, that in my view, tourism is undoubtedly a good thing. Over the last 60 years or so, we've, as you're all aware, witnessed a remarkable rapid growth in tourism in terms of volume and value. Even in the face of economic downturns, events like 9/11, tourism has continued to grow, and with figures of 940 million arrivals just last year, international arrivals, we're soon approaching the UNWTO's forecast, rather daunting forecast of 1.5 billion arrivals by 2020. International tourism receipts, of course, have grown even more rapidly. Last year, 2010, these reached US dollars 919 billion. And of course, at the same time, more and more countries are benefiting from tourism, both directly and indirectly, in terms of foreign exchange earnings, government revenues, employment, and so on. It's quite interesting to note that over 72 countries now attract more than 1 million tourists each year. And what that represents is the quite remarkable transfer of astonishing sums of money. At the same time, of course, we mustn't forget the benefits that this growth has brought to tourists themselves. Many years ago, tourism was described as a social victory. What tourism has brought and is continuing to bring to more and more peoples of the world is the opportunity to travel, the opportunities to learn, the opportunities to experience different cultures, and of course to meet, liaise, and enjoy being with people from other places and other cultures. Now, this brings me to two important points. First of all, of course, tourism has long been seen as a vital and significant force in development. The WTO, back in 1980, at the Miller Declaration, wrote, and I quote, "World tourism can contribute to the establishment of a new international economic order that will help eliminate the widening economic gap between developed and developing countries and ensure steady acceleration of economic and social development and progress, in particular in developing countries." That's quite an important point. Now, of course, the WTO sees tourism contributing more to sustainable development, though whether this can occur or not is what this debate is really about today. Of course, tourism is associated with a variety of costs and negative impacts as well. And undoubtedly its benefits are perhaps less widely experienced than might be hoped. Moreover, while tourism undoubtedly encourages economic growth, the extent to which it can promote wider sustainable development, which is what we're talking about, is much more debatable. The second point I'd like to make in this preamble is that this growth in tourism has actually been driven to a great extent by the tourism industry. In the academic world, we always explain that tourism has grown because of increases in wealth and free time, through technological advance and so on and so forth. But in my view, the principal driver of the growth of tourism has been what is here today, the tourism industry. It's been an innovative, a dynamic industry, and continues to be so, an industry which has taken advantage of technological advance, market and regulatory liberalisation to produce an ever-increasing variety of experiences to meet the needs of an expanding and maturing market. If we can link these 2 points, though, the question is, as the motion is, are the main beneficiaries of tourism the industry and tourists? In other words, is it principally the tourism industry and its customers that benefit from tourism, the former, the industry in terms of profits, the latter in terms of satisfying and, importantly, affordable holidays experiences? And it's vital to think in terms of travel and holidays in terms of costs and benefits to the tourists. We've all seen the surveys which suggest that tourists would be happy to pay 5, 10, 15% more for holidays that are ethically sound or responsible. But actually, evidence suggests the opposite. Price remains the dominant factor in travel and holiday choice. One only has to look at the success of the low-cost airlines. Dare I mention Ryanair, now the world's largest international carrier, to see the dominant influence of price. Everybody loves to hate Ryanair, but 72 million people still fly with them each year. And if indeed the benefits of tourism do accrue mostly to the industry and its customers, which they probably do, is the cost of this the more limited benefits to destination, communities and environments? In other words, are the industry and its consumers or customers in effect exploiting local communities, and should they be doing more, for example in a CSR sense, to contribute more locally? My view to these two questions is a definite yes. It is the industry, it is consumers, tourists that benefit most, and a qualified yes to the industry should contribute more. Yes, the industry certainly most definitely benefits, and in certain circumstances, too little benefit does accrue to local communities. But I'm not actually convinced there's a causal relationship between the profits made by the industry and the lack of benefit that goes to local communities' environments. Should we expect the industry to do more? and I certainly appreciate there are many players within the industry who do a lot more, who do act responsibly? Or are we indeed expecting too much of the industry? Are we taking perhaps a too narrow viewpoint of the role of the industry, or in fact what the industry is? So, in supporting this motion, there are 3 key points I'd like to make. First of all, we really need to think what we mean by the industry. For 2-3 decades, the industry has been the butt of criticisms about the negative impacts associated with the tourism development. Journalists, academics and others have written at length about the problems of tourism, particularly mass tourism. But what actually is this industry we are talking about? In my view, it's not actually an industry. It's a collection of separate industries, separate sectors that collectively provide services to tourists, both directly and indirectly. In other words, what we're all involved in is not an industry, but an economic sector, which is defined in the end by tourist experiences. Now, of course, there are obvious members of this industry, transport, accommodation, tour operators, attraction operators, and so on and so forth. But there are many other industries or sectors that also provide essential services to tourists and tourism. The financial sector, the bankers, dare I say it, play a central role in international travel. Many of us would not be able to travel without the support of the financial sector. Food and beverage providers, of course, indirectly support the industry. Another interesting example is the publishing industry. Guidebooks, or publishers of guidebooks, have a huge influence on where tourists go, how they behave, what they do, and in some cases have become very large and reasonably profitable businesses. Lonely Planet, now owned by the BBC, of course, in 2009-10 turned over £51 million, made £2 million profit. Can we actually separate the publisher, Lonely Planet, from the rest of the tourism industry in terms of the debate today? The point I'm trying to make is that it's easy to generalise about an assumed tourism industry, but certainly in the context of debates such as this, we do need to be careful what we mean by the term. In other words, who is it that is actually profiting most from tourism? It's also important to think about the characteristics of our industry. Yes, there are the major players, of course, who we're all aware of. But of course, the great majority of tourism on a worldwide scale isn't international, nor is it controlled, run by the major players. Something like 80% of all tourism activity is domestic, and in many countries the domestic market is much, much larger than the international market. And secondly, that sector, and indeed tourism as a whole, is predominantly made up of very small, locally owned business operators, all of whom, or to a great extent, who employ local people, use local products, and as far as they can within the context and constraints of their business, bring benefits to the local community. So what I'm trying to say is that what we're talking about is a very specific sector of the industry when we're talking about excessive profits or the industry profiting, customers profiting, but too few benefits to local communities. And in my view, we're talking particularly about destinations with particular products and markets, primarily mass tourism, with relatively high reliance on international tourists and international tourism businesses. In other words, the debate about the benefits accruing mostly to businesses and tourists perhaps cannot be applied to the tourism industry generally, or tourism generally. The second and most fundamental point, key to this debate, is that, of course, tourism is essentially a form of capitalism or capitalistic endeavour. The tourist industry, or rather the businesses that directly provide services to tourists, and those businesses that have played a major role in developing tourism over the last 5 or 6 decades, are just that. They are businesses, whether large multinational corporations, small owner-operated, one-man bands, 10 employees, SMEs. They exist primarily for one reason, to make a profit. And they do so. And to do so, they follow the rules of capitalism. All tourism businesses exploit resources, financial, human, natural, and so on, to produce products or services and experiences that are sold at prices that allow them to remain competitive, but also, of course, result in profit. And, of course, in liberal market economies, which the world is increasingly defined by, you couldn't expect businesses to do otherwise. What this means, of course, is that businesses seek to exploit resources as efficiently as possible to minimise the costs of their operations and to optimise profits. And this is the key point, because it's this drive for profit which underpins many of the negative consequences associated with tourism development, those consequences which have long been publicised and debated. There is absolutely no doubt at all that destinations have been exploited and often degraded through tourism development. There is absolutely no doubt that on occasion local communities have been exploited in one way or another, whether through low wages, exclusion from the sector, denial of access to land, and so on and so forth. Just the other week, there's a story emerging from Sri Lanka, where they're hoping to take benefit of the peace dividend. They're searching for a fivefold increase in tourist numbers over the next 5 years. But many local people are complaining that they are now being excluded from their beaches, from their fishing grounds, and so on and so forth. That is undoubtedly partly the drive of the industry in a broad sense, trying to profit to develop tourism. I could have, of course, listed many examples of the limited benefits and costs to local communities and environments resulting from tourism, but these have been more than adequately highlighted over the years by journalists, academics, Tourism Concern, and other organisations. And the question, of course, to return to this fundamental debate is whether the industry should contribute more and implicitly profit less to the destinations which they exploit, but, of course, nevertheless depend upon. Should, for example, natural environments be priced and the industry charged for the use of them, for beaches, for ski slopes, for forest, for rainforest, or whatever it might be? Should the industry support local projects to develop local supply chains or to encourage more local engagement, employment and tourism? The answer to all of these is probably yes, but there are sort of moral and very strong political overtones. And also, it's kind of interesting to think that this debate we're having today is also almost a metaphor for a debate about capitalism in general. We could ask exactly the same questions about any other industry. But finally, what I'd like to suggest is that what we need to do is not take quite such a narrow view of the tourism industry, because in destination areas it could be thought of as including the public sector, in other words, national or local governments, or those bodies with the responsibility for determining or implementing tourism policy. Because frequently these bodies do, in one way or another, profit from tourism. Many governments make significant revenues in terms of taxation duties, arrival, departure tax, income from licences on tourism operators, and so on and so forth. But in my view, all too often, and this is my fundamental point, that there is a failure on the part of these bodies, these organisations, to act effectively. In other words, the only way that the benefits of tourism to local communities and environments can be enhanced is through the appropriate regulation and governance. And it is my view that it is primarily in the area of governance, in regulation, in policy development, that both the problem and the solution in terms of limited benefits to local communities and environment lies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Do you want to ask your questions of your...
Yeah, if I could turn to, or first of all introduce Julia Bishop from ZATI, the Zanzibar Association of Tourism Investors in Zanzibar, who's very kindly agreed to be on my side today. Julia, from your experience in Zanzibar and your work in Zanzibar, to what extent did you feel that it is primarily the responsibility of the public sector for the failure for local communities to benefit most from tourism?
Thank you, Richard. Should I borrow one of these mics? Thank you very much. I'll introduce myself as the director of ZATI. ZATI is an organisation in Zanzibar, private sector organisation. We've got 110 members, a lot of the hotels, tour operators, airlines, retail and wholesale outlets, suppliers to the industry. So we're a quite broad-based industry organisation, and we represent the needs and requirements of the industry to the government. So we have a lobbying advocacy role, and we also push back to the industry when it comes to new regulation, legislation, and to an extent self-regulation. So, yes, Zanzibar, I'm sure you all know, you're all, after all, in the travel industry. We're 22 miles off the East African coast, and we're 6 degrees south of the equator. We've got a relatively young tourism industry, probably, say, younger than Kenya, but older than Mozambique, if that defines it for any of you. Probably about 20 years of tourism growth. Been told not to tell you how fast we've been growing because that's what everybody says. But anyway, something like 250,000 tourists come to Zanzibar every year. Many of them from the mainland of Tanzania. Of course, we are part of Tanzania, semi-autonomous. A lot of people go on a safari first and come to Zanzibar afterwards, which makes us sound like purely a beach destination. We're not actually, even though we're classically in the Indian Ocean as a beach archipelago. We're not all sun and sand because we've got a very, very rich cultural history and heritage, which is based on Swahili culture, Arabic influences, and obviously the hub of the trading routes through the Indian Ocean through the years. So that's Zanzibar, and that's the association. And the question that I've been asked is, who benefits from tourism? I'll answer it from the perspective of Zanzibar because it's the place I know best. But I'm pretty sure most of you who in the industry dealing with other countries will hear echoes of what I say, hopefully within your own countries too. The way we see it in the private sector, the benefits actually, I think, are spread. They're quite clearly spread around. From the investor's point of view, if you like, we're looking at, first of all, the industry and the consumers is the question. We've got something like 200 hotels. A lot of them have been there for 10 or 15 years. There's something like $750 million US actually invested on the ground in Zanzibar. And I would say that actually, in terms of it being a business climate, it's not that easy. So those who do invest and succeed are usually pretty tough and stick it out quite a long time before they really succeed. So, but then they do benefit, and yes, there's quite a lot of people who came in as a single investor and they've now expanded, increased from 1 hotel to 3 hotels, from a small airline to a larger airline. And so yes, obviously people are making money there as investors. They are benefiting from this. And I'm still on the same argument, but actually I'd also like to pause at this point and say, and why the hell not? By the way, we're talking about it being a capitalistic endeavor. Yes, we're talking about making money out of this. Absolutely, it's very hard work, and the capital upfront investment is enormous. Of course you want returns on your investment, and I don't think any industry should be shy about saying that they're in it for the money. Of course they are. Why else would you do it, actually? And if you don't have a profitable business, then it isn't sustainable, and you can't help anybody anyway. So let's first of all say, yeah, of course they're here to make money, and of course they should be benefiting, naturally. Exploiting, is that a rude word? I'm not sure. Isn't it just another way of saying that you uncover something amazing and you present it to people for their enjoyment? Over-exploiting, for sure. But exploiting, yeah, they're there to exploit the natural resources of a country to their own profit. That's actually what the investors are there for, of course. It doesn't mean to say they can do that however they want to do it, and they should certainly not do that to any kind of detriment to the country or the people or the environment, but that is essentially what they're there for. So my first point is, yes, of course, the investors are benefiting. Who else benefits? Of course, yes, the tour operators. Naturally, there are companies who have been making good money out of sending people to Zanzibar for years. Travel agents, of course, and yes, even the guidebooks. They're all, of course, benefiting from any kind of destination. And, of course, so they should, because if they go out of business, then there's nobody to send us any tourists. The consumers, that's the tourists, yes. And this is really the heart of it. That's why we run a tourism industry, isn't it? It's so that people get pleasure. And it's so that people can go to another destination and be educated and amazed and fascinated and entertained, and so that they can be nourished and their soul can go through an experience that they're not going to get at home. That's why we're in the industry. So of course, yes, all these people are going to be benefiting: the investors, the operators, and the tourists themselves. Now, the question is that enough, or should it go further? And in terms of Zanzibar, it's a poor country. It doesn't really have any other industry. We're employing in the industry something like 15,000 people. There's another 50,000 people who are indirectly employed in the industry, and all of those are probably responsible for for at least 5 people each. So add all of that up, and yes, it's actually the largest private sector employer in the country, and that's huge. So yes, of course, people are benefiting for sure. And not only that, but it's not just the mango supplier and the fishermen, but it's also the industry that's sprung up around tourism in construction, and indeed the accountants and the lawyers that have had to come and supply and support the industry. So yes, they're also all benefiting, all those people, the traditional industries like fishing and farming, and then the newer industries that are there to support tourism, of course. But who else is benefiting? Well, the government. Actually, in Zanzibar anyway, we're almost half of the GDP. We're 70% of foreign direct income. The money that the government gets from the tourism industry runs into the hundreds of millions every year. Of course, the economy is driven by tourism, as it is in many of these small nations. And even more so than the whole of Tanzania, because on the mainland there's mining, there's agriculture, there's all sorts of other industries. In the little part of Tanzania that is Zanzibar, actually tourism is our industry. That's our main industry. So yeah, we are driving the economy. So the government is most definitely benefiting from it. The question, though, I think, is should they do more? And yes, if you look at that, then I guess what we're saying is, in terms of making the tourism industry in Zanzibar more sustainable, who should be doing what? I think that it's actually very much a public-private partnership here. Everyone has their role to play, but everyone must play their role well and must play it hand in hand with the other side. We all sit around the same table in Zanzibar. The private and public sector actually cooperate pretty well together. We have quite a strong advocacy program into the government, and they also use us as a distribution of information to the industry. So we're quite fortunate in that we do have a good relationship with the government. We work well with them. What I'd say, though, in terms of what needs to happen, the investors should do more. Of course they should. We're trying to self-regulate at the moment with Responsible Tourism Tanzania. That's rttz.org if anyone's interested. We've actually put together sustainability criteria based on business sustainability, environment, people and community, culture and heritage. And very soon every single hotel in Zanzibar will be audited. And in order to become part of ZATI eventually, I would like to feel that that you would need to at least be on level 1 in order to be part of our organisation. So we're actually trying to raise the bar there in the private sector. And that's based on Global Sustainable Tourism Council criteria. The suppliers, yes, you've got things like Travel Life. We mentioned Marks and Spencer's actually in the previous lecture. I think that there's a great awareness job that is being done very, very well by those suppliers in the industry, the tour operators. That could still go a lot further in the same way that Marks and Spencer's pushes that to the consumer. And I think the people who travel, the tourists, could also do more. And we've spoken about the increase in gap years in travellers' philanthropy and philanthropic activities from travelling. And that's thankfully really on the increase. And somewhere like Zanzibar absolutely benefits from that. From the guy that wants to come out and help run a clinic to the guy that is a football coach and just wants to kick around a ball in a village, to the people who want to start up a school. I mean, that really, really does benefit Zanzibar, and it could do a lot more once that awareness is fully raised.
Julie, could I sort of butt in here? Could I ask a similar question of Adama here as well? Because you're covering things which I think Adama might like to answer in terms of the Gambia. Very pleased also to have Adama Bar from the Gambia, and it's particularly interesting because in many ways Zanzibar and the Gambia split by 3,000 miles, but are very, very similar countries, both economically, in terms of levels of poverty. They're both strongly Islamic countries, but also in terms of their tourism sector. Adama, could I ask you a very, very direct question about the Gambia, because I know you've had a long involvement in the industry there. Do you believe that the industry can and should do more, the tourism sector in the Gambia can and should do more in terms of spreading the benefits, enhancing the benefits to local communities in the Gambia?
Obviously, yes. I think there is more to be done, but we should recognize the things that are also done. I can remember 15 years ago, I think it was in 1999, for the first time tourism was put on the global agenda, sustainability for tourism was put on the global agenda at the United Nations. And those who were there during those numbers of days that we were there, we were lobbying hard to get the industry on our side. All they talked about as far as sustainability is concerned was the environment. To get social issues on the agenda was like, how do I call it, getting the sun to the Eskimo or something. I mean, it was very difficult to put the social issues on the agenda for tour operators or the industry to accept. We got to celebrate what we have got today. I tell you, I'm going to my 60s, and I don't want to die a grumpy old man all the time, not celebrating what we have got today. I mean, I think we've got something great, and we should celebrate it. The talk now is sustainability, and those companies that are not on board are crazy. They can't make it. You've got a consumer who is becoming more aware and who wants an ethical product. You've got countries that are looking forward. Democracy is spreading everywhere. If a country like the Gambia, which is small, 1.5 million, can over 10 years ago say no to uninclusives, it means governments have a role to play. Just like the citizens of every country have a role to play. I would not say it's just industry. It's governments, it's the people in those countries, they all have a role to play. So therefore, I think there is much to be done. We are still not there, but I think we also need to celebrate the achievements that we've got. I was listening to the APTA presentation yesterday, and it is heartening to know that out of 70 employees in APTA, over 10% dedicating their services to sustainability. They have 10 employees in this recession that are looking at nothing but sustainability. So it is becoming the call of the day. Now, any company that is not actually looking at it that way is bound to fail, because you can't make it in the destinations that are coming. Governments are becoming more aware, people are becoming more aware, and exploitation, no. Many people are saying no to exploitation. So I think, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is much needs to be done. But we should also celebrate the achievements that we have got over the years. Today, it is heartening that a lot of companies are actually talking about sustainability. That's my answer.
Thank you. That's this side done, Harold.
Richard, thank you very much. I feel for you, I must say. I really thought we might get some more criticism than that, but great. Thank you very much, Richard. Luke, Luke, do you want to come and make the case for the other side of the argument? And I'll go and brief Ruth to speak for this.
Well, good afternoon. I was a little disheartened when I only saw 3 hands go up. I'm in favour of it, so I might not have won the audience, but I think I've got a majority on the panel by the looks of it from some of the comments that we've just had. And so I want to start off by saying this argument and this disagreement we're supposed to have, actually, that there's an awful lot of commonality between what I want to say and what Richard has just said. It's not correct in this situation. I can see Harold beginning to shake his head going, oh, God, they're all going to agree with each other now about this. But tourism can be a force for good when it's done well. But equally, when tourism is not done well, it can have the opposite consequences. And I think we only need to look at the experience of the industry over the last decades to be able to point out examples where it has succeeded and you can see the benefits and you can see it thriving, and you can look at the opposite, destinations where the benefits haven't been shared and where there are concerns that still exist. So I just want to look at a few of the things that make tourism sustainable and why it should be more sustainable as a central point of where I am. But I want to look briefly at some of Richard's arguments when we start. He talks about tourism being a capitalist endeavour. Well, you only need to look at some of the share prices and some of the profit warnings from tourism to know that actually it is not as capitalist endeavour and profitable as perhaps some in the industry would like it to be at the moment. But is there any problem with tourism making money? Is there anything wrong with there being benefits from tourism on a monetary scale? And I'm going to say, no, there's not. And we shouldn't apologise for making money as part of the tourism industry. But we need to look at where profitability and sustainability sit together. Now, are they mutually exclusive? Can you have profitability on one side and sustainability on the other, but they don't work together? Actually, in the 21st century, profitable businesses must be sustainable businesses. You won't be able to have one without the other to make that work. And it needs to be much more than the CSR halo, that you can look around the economy as a whole and say, yes, we're being green, yes, we're being green, because consumers want someone to be green. Whether they're being green or not behind the PR spin is a different matter. And that's why it's so important that in our industry, we're able to shed off the top layer. There's not a lot of PR spin in some of these cases, and what you are seeing is genuine improvements in sustainability and a real case being made by the industry that there are benefits. And tourism does bring benefits. It brings taxes to destination governments. Indeed, the amount of APD and air passenger duty, aviation taxes that you have all paid to the UK government, the UK government has done very well out of you all coming here as well as a destination. When it does well, it delivers benefits for everyone. And that's what we need to look at, okay? But has all development been sustainable in the past? And have all the benefits been shared? And I look around the room here and I see people shaking their heads and saying no. And actually, I would agree with you that in the past, the industry has not always learnt the lessons from those developments that are not sustainable, those business models that might not deliver a shared benefit. But I would argue that the industry, right here in the 21st century in the UK, is learning the lessons that have come before. There are great pathfinders that are making the case, but still more needs to be done. And it would be great if we had a crystal ball that we could look into the future and say, right, these sustainability efforts will work here, and these ones won't work there. And if we really knew what was going on, we would have done this. But we don't have that crystal ball. So to a certain extent, we have to try and fail and improve, and try and fail and improve. One of the basics of capitalism, in fact, that actually success is driven from learning from the experiences where things don't work. And where things do work, you build on them further. And that's exactly what we need to do here. But fundamental to the tourism industry is the concept that for tourism to work, there must be thriving destinations. Now, this is absolutely key to where ABTA has been over the last couple of years in investing in the people that do the sustainability that was just mentioned by one of my panellists there, and in driving the industry with a real vision that for a successful industry, for successful businesses, for ABTA members to return a profit to their shareholders, for the employees to have a quality job, for the government to get a fair tax take, we need destinations to be thriving. Because without a thriving destination, you don't have customers that want to go there, which means you don't make any money along the process. So it's all integral together. And it's that one big plan that we need to have. But as part of that one big plan, you need to have sustainability, kind of a responsibility in a finite world baked into that. So it's not an optional extra. It has to be baked in. But I'd ask those businesses in the audience here, when we talk about sustainability, because sometimes it can be argued that, oh, I might want to be sustainable, actually I might not want to be sustainable. And actually, when you hear those debates, you're talking about the PR spin that goes along with it. How many people genuinely want an unsustainable business? How many people want to be exploiting a resource to the point where that resource will disappear and they'll be no longer able to exploit it, to the point where that business will cease to exist? Very few, I would argue, although from looking around the audience here and seeing people lean in, they might have suggested some other industries, hopefully not tourism, along the way, that might be looking at that. But one thing we have to do here is realise that these businesses that want to be more sustainable are not doing it without a roadmap. We have pathfinder businesses that are exploring it. We have pathfinder destinations that are really embracing sustainability. And yes, through organisations like ABTA, I would like to think we have pathfinder associations that are saying being unsustainable is not something that will make you profitable in the future. It doesn't make you profitable now. And with a vision to say we need sustainable businesses, it will drive change within the industry. And we're already seeing that. So ABTA's got a product that was mentioned by my colleague from Zanzibar called Travel Life. How many people have heard of Travel Life before? Oh, fantastic. In that case, you don't get the corporate sell as to what Travel Life is, which is good. In a nutshell, Travel Life is a system that assesses the sustainability of tourist accommodation, that looks at not only the carbon impacts, but water, societal impacts, employment practices, food chain, a whole sense of procurement things. It's the wraparound that looks at it. Now, we've had a huge take-up of Travel Life. Tour operators in the UK, tour operators from overseas have signed up to Travel Life. It's something that's driving the industry. But in many cases, this is not being driven by consumer demand for it. Yes, surveys are saying that consumers want greener holidays, as rightly pointed out, but most aren't prepared to pay for it. What ABTA research shows is that people want greener holidays and they expect the industry to be delivering on that greener holiday. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that industry needs to be loading costs to deliver that greener holiday. In fact, actually, if managed correctly, a more sustainable business actually saves that business money in not having lights on when they don't need to, in not buying things and transporting it long distances where they could be sourced locally. A whole host of examples that can deliver a more sustainable and more profitable business along the way. But a sustainable business also delivers a better sense of customer satisfaction. From the ABTA survey of those hotels using Travel Life, what we found was that actually they return a better level of customer satisfaction than those people that weren't using Travel Life or that were using Travel Life before they started the scheme. And what that shows is that when you look at your business model from start to finish, the customer journey from when they walk into your accommodation to when they leave, and if you've understood the impacts and you've worked to improve every step of the way, you will get a better customer experience for your customers. Now, that means they're more likely to come back. That means they're more likely to spend money again where you are. It means you're more likely to make a profit. So sustainability and profitability does work together. But it's a lazy argument that suggests that we must wait for the customers to deliver on sustainability. The industry has a responsibility to lead in many of these cases. And I would agree with Richard's remarks, actually, that the industry, however you define it, can be tour operators and travel agents, and it can be hotels and airlines, and it can be destination governments and destination organisations. It's all of those together. And we all have a responsibility within that to have some leadership and vision as to where we want to take the industry. And a more sustainable industry that customers want, that they expect, is important, because we want sustainability to genuinely not be a niche product. Now, if you look around, and I've been to many WTM debates where people say, oh, look at me, I'm a niche market, I'm a sustainable company, I do green tourism, and it's all very good. And look at my unique product because I'm green. Well, that's great. But what we need is mass market, the biggest companies in our industry to the smallest ones adopting those same sustainable aspects of that. Because having one small company sustainable is good and is welcome. Having the industry sustainable, adopting those same practices, is really what we want to get to. And so what I want to say here is that in addition to the industry touching on sustainability responsibility there, and destination governments having responsibility, I want to single out one other audience that we haven't touched on yet. And I look nervously at those people with pens and paper here, who are most likely to be the journalists who I now want to focus on. And there's a photographer in the way, otherwise I'd be looking at the Travel Weekly journalists just behind there. And that's actually to say that the media has a responsibility in terms of sustainability. A responsibility to accurately report of actually what is going on. Now, that's not to say they don't do it at the moment, but it's to look behind some of those elements. So, as an industry, quite a lot of products, for instance, have been taken off sale, not because they are unsafe, but because they are unsustainable for the destination that we've been delivering them in. Big companies like Thomas Cook, and hopefully Ruth will be able to expand on this shortly, have taken excursions off sale because they're not sustainable in the destination. But yet only a couple of weeks later, you can see it in travel magazines saying, look at this amazing destination and excursion that you're on. Now, we have a responsibility to inform the industry and to inform the media and to inform the public to make sensible choices. when they're on their holiday, about what the impacts are of that, just as the media has a responsibility to ensure that actually sustainability is one of those things they look at when they choose what to put in the magazines, what excursions to highlight, what destinations to highlight, to really make sure that it's not the industry needing to PR in, to sell in sustainable holidays, or we've got a great new green holiday, I want to PR it. It's actually to say that we need all our holidays to be greener, and where they are not, destination governments, the industry, the consumers and the media have a responsibility to say, actually, we're not going to be promoting these products here because they are unsustainable. Because it does me as an industry, me as a magazine, me as a tour operator, whatever it may be, no favours to be promoting something that is unsustainable. The key of this is simple. We're all aware of the impacts of climate change. We're all aware of what effects that is having right here, right now, in terms of impacts on tourism. If we don't make a greener, more sustainable industry, both niche and mass market, those destinations we seek to serve won't be there anymore. Now, that might be because they might be underwater. It might be that the local population have said, I don't want to participate in this industry, in this stage here, because actually the benefits aren't mutually shared. And one thing I want to challenge in here is, to do this, we need the consumers to be a beneficiary. We need the industry to be a beneficiary. We need, sometimes, the shareholders to make a profit as part of this, and we need the local populations to make a profit as well, be that financial or be that improvements in infrastructure or otherwise. Because otherwise, there's simply not going to be the industry that we need there. Now, our American cousins from across the pond have a phrase that green is green. And when first imported into Britain, there was lots of very confused Brits going around there going, yes, of course green is green. It's green. I don't quite get why using this example. It helps if you realise that American currency is green as well. And then suddenly all the Brits went, oh, yes, I see what you mean. Green policies, sustainability can deliver profits. Increasingly, we're going into a world where if you are not delivering sustainable industry in whatever form, in whatever sector, you will not have a licence to operate. Be that a government-afforded licence or be that a licence that the customers trust to give you their money for a product or service in return. We need to make green be green genuinely, and that's taking those examples that we've got now and expanding them. And we're on a journey here, so we haven't reached that yet. I'm not standing here defending all ABTA members, saying all our holidays are sustainable in ultimatum. I'm saying that our ABTA members are on a process of becoming more sustainable that we need to encourage. And as part of that process, that needs to be led by the industry with a vision of what sustainability needs to look like. It needs to be supported by destination governments that want to develop a more sustainable industry for their destination. And it needs to be led by the media who herald and support sustainability and highlight where things are unsustainable as well, using their time-honoured and important role as a critique of what's going on, as a critic of our industry. But ultimately, we need the customers not to be just demanding a sustainable holiday, but to go on holiday knowing that that holiday is sustainable, that the limits and the impacts on the destination of their departure point have been assessed and limited and mitigated against, and with a constant effort to challenge that. And that's where we need to be. And hopefully, in a few questions' time, that's hopefully where we'll be able to prove some examples as to where the industry currently is. But it's a big challenge, but it's one that the industry is currently working on. And I would encourage you all, when you vote in a few moments' time, to actually support that industry by saying, yes, more can be done, but more is being done right at the moment. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I've got my little gang of supporters down the far ends, and when you start having a vote, you'll notice some extra people came in, and that is the emptying of the ABTA stand. So we now have 7 votes in the audience, not just 3, as we started. But first question I want to direct to both Noel and Ruth. Ruth is from Thomas Cook, manages sustainability there, and Noel is an industry veteran from Sunville Holidays and also sits on the ABTA board. So it might be a loaded question when I say, is tourism profitable at the moment?
You're asking me?
Well, go on.
No, it's ghastly. It's strange, this whole debate. I think you've probably been more critical than Richard was, or Julia. I expected some really nasty to come out that we would have to defend about our practices, but nothing like that has come out. Things have changed enormously over the years. The awareness, the way we're working now, is very, very different. I don't think you could have found anyone who's more critical of large mass-market companies than I have been in the past. But if you look at what TUI and Thomas Cook are beginning to do now, the difference is enormous. The other thing you've got to remember is that small companies are often very critical of the large companies. Without the large companies, none of us would be able to fly to a lot of the destinations that we're protecting or that we're helping to develop. During the first Gulf War, when IOG in Tehran collapsed, when Harry Goodman came back into the industry, we organized a debate at ATA, the Association of Independent Tour Operators. And one of the questions that was posed to Harry Goodman was, why has your company destroyed Turkey? And that was in the late 80s, early 90s, because at that time, Intisan IOG was putting people into accommodation that some of us wouldn't even put our dogs in. And what Harry Goodman's answer was quite clear. He said, nobody told me to stop. And the fact is this, that a lot of people in destinations who we, looking in at them, are very critical, are making a lot of money out of tourism and are making a very good living out of tourism. If you look, for instance, at some of the ghettos that have been created, look at Kavos, look at Faliraki, all these areas where we can be critical of the image that they have developed for the destination. The fact is that it's the people who live there that often are the biggest supporters of this kind of tourism. So I cannot understand how we can turn around and say that they are not benefiting. If they didn't like it, why are they continuing with it? I find this very, very difficult. The industry, very often, or the outbound industry, if you want to call us that, are far more critical of our actions than a lot of the people who are benefiting. And really what we need is examples of where we've really trashed it, where we have really made a mess of what we're doing. But the fact is that we're not doing that anymore.
Thanks, Noel. And for Ruth, I'll be careful about any kind of like... The great thing about being a trade association is that I'm not allowed anywhere near price because it's illegal for me to do anything over with price. So when I ask a pricing question in terms of is tourism profitable, I'm not talking about price, just to specify that so you don't try and get me arrested for price fixing afterwards. Is tourism profitable, says I, cautiously?
I think most people working in tourism would say that it's definitely not the most profitable industry to be in. Certainly from a tour operator perspective. But I do think that, firstly, I have to say sustainability and profit go hand in hand, and I think that's essential. And referring back to what was said earlier, we shouldn't be ashamed to say that sustainability is about delivering increased profit, because that is what businesses are there for. But I think we should also say that tourism brings more than just profit. It brings infrastructural development, it brings jobs, and I think the number of jobs that it brings should not be underestimated in any respect. The step change that we have now is to develop the jobs that it brings to make sure they are better jobs and jobs where people are being treated fairly. But the fact is, jobs have been created and are there because of tourism. And I think one thing that's not touched on very often, and I'm not an expert on it, I'm just going to mention it, is that, you know, some of the large operators have brought change to destinations on a large scale in areas such as training in health and hygiene for local people, and they've brought step change in local health through the requirements and the training that's had to be delivered in order to service the guests that come into that country, and that is actually a substantial benefit to a destination.
That's great. I think we're quite keen to get some questions from the floor at the future bit, so we'll pause there and resume the cross-examination in a moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. I'd like now, if I may, to throw it over to see if people from the floor. Are there questions you'd like to ask of the panel? Please.
My name is Gerda Van Holtz. I come from Mexico. I do agree with you in general, but the question is, the governments do have a responsibility, but they're also nailed down by this profit they will have to they have of taxes, and that is why, at least in Mexico, there isn't a strong regulation on the exploitation of the resources. How can that be resolved?
Okay, can we take another question maybe from the floor and then answer a couple together? There's a gentleman here. Sorry, yes, he was the mic's just coming to you.
Sorry, the name is Dave McKeown from London. The Professor Sharpley, you finished with a sort of touching faith in regulation to handle the question of excessive profits to industry and consumer surplus to consumers. Could you expand on that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Richard.
So I stand up, please. Yes, I quite this is answering both questions in a way. Mexico is kind of interesting because certainly from an academic perspective, Cancun is often used as an example of traditional modernist economically driven development, which research has shown has been unsuccessful in achieving wider benefits to the wider community in terms of backward linkages in the economy. And I was, in the same vein, I was being slightly provocative at the end, saying that yes, it is the role of governance or governments to not necessarily reduce the profits of tourism businesses or to encourage them to invest in local industries or whatever. The point I was trying to make is that, as all the panelists have been making, is that all tourism businesses are businesses and just that, and like all businesses in any economic sector, for them to behave or to react to situations which perhaps do not follow the logic of capitalism of profit, there needs to be some form of intervention or other, whether it's in banking, as we discovered 2 or 3 years ago, or in any other sector. And certainly it is my view that any tourism destination itself should be viewed as a form of business. Now, one of the inputs into that business are the businesses, both international and domestic, who provide services to tourists. But if you like, the CEO of a destination, more often than not, is a regulatory body or an organisational body from the public sector, with the potential to influence how organisations behave, whether they should be required to pay additional taxes in terms of the environment, whether they should be obliged to support training schemes, or whatever it might be to try and enhance the wider benefits of tourism in the destination. And it can only be the public sector, it can only be those organisations endowed with the responsibility to provide good governance, i.e. to provide as far as possible benefits to their citizens through working with businesses to increase those benefits. So what I'm saying is that it can only be the appropriate government, public sector body with the power and the authority to control, to regulate, to intervene, to encourage the industry in one way or another, be it through taxation as the most obvious one, to enhance benefits to the community. I hope that answers the question.
Richard, can I come in there? That point, and be controversial and say yes and no, and give a real politician's answer to it. I think there's a role for government in these places here, but I think unfashionably, I don't want governments at the moment aren't delivering on that in every destination. So there's a role for the industry to provide that leadership, and I think right across the world, certainly from looking at the destinations that UK tour operators serve, to a certain extent, you can look at destinations that are doing something, where the public sector is strong, is unsullied by other interests, and is, doing that. But for each one of those, you can point at one where actually the impetus on reform is coming from the industry, it's coming from tour operators to say, actually, we're not going to use that type of hotel anymore because it's unsafe or it's unsustainable in some way. We don't support that business practice there. And actually, that type of excursion actually is ruining what we're taking people to see. And so you've got to change that. And actually, that lead needs to come both from government and both from the industry. And actually, in a way that I would like to think in many places that the industry and the government are working together. I think, sadly, all too often, we're seeing situations where the industry is clashing with the government in some of these cases. And the people that lose out in that situation are both the destination population and also the customers, who could be getting a better, more sustainable holiday if these people just spoke to each other a bit more. And so, yes, where the governments are working, they need to be talking to industry. And where that's not happening at the moment, many destination governments need to take a lead from what industry is actually doing in many cases and pick out the pathfinder ones. Thomas Cook and Somerville, the people that are sitting beside me, great examples of actually how sustainability can make for a better holiday and for a better destination. So start picking off those examples and saying, right, I want that for my destination. I'm going to work with them to do that. Net effect of that is there'll be better sustainability. Those companies that invest in sustainability will make more money off it.
Richard, do you want to come back on that?
I was just going to very quickly say that increasingly it seems, particularly more in the Western world, that the governments seem to be increasingly disassociating themselves from tourism. And yes, there are examples, and I can quote one or two examples of apparently positive actions on the part of governments. In Mauritius, for example, there are policies for taxation, for support of social projects on the island. We just have to look at this country, though. I remember 10 years ago, it was 10 years ago this year, that we had the FMD, the foot and mouth crisis here. There was a complete failure on the part of government, it's a specific example I know, to support the rural tourism sector. I remember our Prime Minister at the time expressing surprise on Radio 4. I was driving down to my place of work, and he was expressing surprise that there was this thing called a rural tourism industry worth £12 billion a year at that time. And I was shouting at the radio saying I've been teaching my students that for years. There was a complete failure on the part of government even to recognise the tourism industry, let alone implement appropriate policies to support it at that particular instance, which I know is a specific example rather than the broader context of sustainability, but it's all part of the same thing.
Thanks, Richard. There's a lady here with a question.
Hi, my name's Donna Ogle. I wonder how the panel thinks we can address, for me, what seems one of the greatest challenges, and that is the evaluation of performance. If you look at sustainable tourism, we always think about the triple bottom line, so social, economic and environmental. If you look at corporate life, evaluation is on short-term shareholder return, and that's profit. We never say, well, OK, profit's down, but hey, look what we've done for the environment and for communities. And for me, that's a huge problem, short-term evaluation of performance, which is very much driven from our friends across the pond. How are we going to change that, or how does the panel think we can change that?
Could I suggest that we go to Ruth and then to Noel on that question?
I have to say I agree. That is a problem. Yes, shareholders are predominantly interested in profit. And I think the sooner the day comes that changes, the better for everybody. However, that hasn't stopped the industry or certain parts of it from evaluating their performance in other areas. And I talked earlier before that we produce a report every year on sustainability that covers all aspects of our sustainability programme in great detail, including statistics and targets. And that is sent and is for our shareholders and investors. We also have to report to investors on our climate change programme and what we're doing to reduce carbon emissions. And that also has to be submitted annually. And if we didn't submit that, we would be heavily criticised for it. So there is pressure coming from investors. Perhaps the pressure could be greater and would be welcome to be greater, but the fact is it is there, and that has been a key driver in changing some industry practice.
Noel, can you give your perspective on it? Because it may be different.
It's much easier if you're not a publicly quoted company. If you're not a publicly quoted company, it's your money that you're risking. You're looking very much on long term. If you have a bad year and you have a good year, and when you have a bad year, you say, well, it's a bad year. You're not forced to make redundancies to satisfy a shareholder. So it is too short term, but that's how the stock market, how everything's driven, and it's a great shame that's the case. And I think in any company, and publicly quoted companies, there are conflicts on this, in that one half is under pressure to maintain profitability. The other half may look at the long-term view, and I believe that the long-term view, especially after what's happened over the last few years, is going to be far more prevalent. I think short-termism and short-term profits are really going to be a thing of the past.
Can I come to you for one last question?
Hi, my name is Mohamed Keskin. I'm a doctorate student here in UK, but I'm originally from Turkey. In terms of benefits, I believe that everyone is benefiting from tourism more or less. But the main issue is, I find main tour operators more responsible than the local incoming travel agents working in Turkey practically, because tour operators are they've got more knowledge, they've got experience of operating, they know how to make this business, right? But the main issue, there's a paradox there, the leakage is bigger. The money you pay to gain some tourist experience, it goes to flights. For example, the mass package holidays in Turkey, right? So it's going to, the main issue is there is the leakage. The money is going out of that country. There's a paradox there. How would you explain that?
Richard, can I go to you first and then I'll come back?
I think your question highlights the complexity of really what we're talking about. Yes, the major tour operators, some of the major airlines are very publicly engaging in responsible behaviour. A lot of them have got their own sustainable officers and so on and so forth. And yes, of course, the mass tourism industry that you're referring to in somewhere like Turkey is in many countries is defined by leakages. In other words, all the profits going back to the home country. Yes, it is a problem. Yes, it always will be a problem of any form of international business. What I'd like to do is return to the point I made during my first talk, though, that we're actually, when you're talking about the international sector of tourism, particularly these large, often public quoted companies we're talking about, it's actually a very, very small sector in terms of the number of businesses of the tourism industry. Yes, they carry large numbers and are responsible for large numbers of tourists, but the great majority of businesses are locally owned and employ local people, use local resources. So leakage is not always a problem, and quite often it is not a problem. But it becomes more complex, of course, because when we're talking about that 80% of the travel sector that is, there are SMEs, 10 employees or less, because they do, Noel, act on a very short-term timescale each year. And they probably do not have the expertise, the knowledge, the finances, or any resource to think long-term about sustainability issues. One of my students just recently did a survey in a tourist town in the north of England amongst hoteliers. 70% of them didn't even understand what sustainability meant in terms of their business. It hasn't entered their frame of operations. So we're asking a very simple question, but it's a hugely complex issue, which I know doesn't answer your question, but you can't just talk about leakages and et cetera, et cetera.
I'm just going to let this gentleman in, because he wants to do a follow-up on leakages. Then we will go to Luke and then to you, and we'll finish.
We are trying to talk about absolute things, but things are a little bit relative. What do you think, it's a question for all panelists, is the oil industry, car industry, or financial industry, banking, more responsible than tourism? And what my colleague asked from Turkey, from Croatian perspective, please, Ruth, Luke, Noel, and all other friends from APTA, come in Croatia and exploit us much more, because you will spend money you earned in Great Britain, you will spend it in Croatia, and you leave much more money in Croatia than oil industry, car industry, and Citibank will leave in Croatia. Thank you very much.
I'm going to let you have the last word, Richard, but Luke first, and then we'll come back to you.
I think you've been looking in my diary, because you know that I'm in Dubrovnik, in a meeting with you, in fact, coming up shortly, and it's a lovely place. Do you know what? Leakage, though, is, on the reverse side of the argument, something that I have to deal with every day. I'm not one of the 10 sustainability employed people at ABTA. My job as a day thing, I'm the ABTA's lobbyist. I lobby on behalf of the industry, and it's my job to persuade government ministers of the pitfalls of taxing people to the hilt on getting on a plane and what to do in the event of holiday companies going bust. But actually, the argument I get back to them is the reverse of that leakage point. And they say there's leakage from the UK economy of outbound tourism. Not many people might know this, but it's an official position of the UK government to reduce the number of people travelling on outbound holidays, to actually reduce the number of Brits travelling abroad. It's something that people go, really? I mean, it's only a new policy, it's only a year old, but it's actually to cut the number of outbound tourism because they regard it as leaking from the UK economy. The money spent in Croatia or Zanzibar or anywhere else could be spent in, I don't know, Bournemouth or Aberdeen, lovely as they are. And actually that leakage debate works both ways. The thing is to address that leakage debate, both in destinations and in the UK, for the wonderful new policy we have from the government on this, you have to demonstrate there's mutual benefits. And so you have to demonstrate to the UK government that actually a UK consumer going abroad for holidays actually spends more on their holiday spent in the UK and their pre-spend on stuff that you buy before they go on holiday than an inbound tourist does. But you won't get any mention of outbound tourism in the government tourism policy because it's all about inbound tourism. So actually the argument needs to be about mutual benefits, to actually say, yes, government, UK or destination, there is a benefit from what you do here, but you have to carefully manage it to actually understand that the trade, which is tourism, it's international trade, generates benefits on both sides of that equation. And it's for everyone to maximise their benefit as part of it, but you're not going to win by one side trouncing the other or the other side trouncing the other one. You need to have mutual benefits. And if anyone happens to bump into a UK government minister about tourism, would like to tell them actually what tourism does in your destination, why they shouldn't be putting UK nationals off from travelling abroad, and why actually government should not be telling people where they should be going on holiday, you'd be very welcome. Please do.
Richard, do you want to just have the final word on this motion?
I mean, Luke sort of said two things there. He demonstrated the complexity of what we're talking about. Tourism is global, maybe not globalised, but certainly a global phenomenon. There are no clear winners, there are no clear losers. I think the sum is something like we're in deficit to £16 billion a year on the travel account because of this leakage that Luke was referring to.
If you only look at one stat, yes. Or profit, if you look at the pre-spend.
Yeah. But the industry is undoubtedly run on profit. Certainly the larger tour operators, yes, they are endeavouring to develop policies that suggest they're becoming more responsible in their behaviour, but still they're driven by price. They're still driven by putting as many bottoms on aeroplane seats at the lowest price possible to get them to destinations, because that is how tourists still, the great majority of tourists still buy on price, despite all the various, yes, they do, despite all these surveys. There are certainly some tourists who buy responsible holidays, eco holidays. I would still contend that if they're not driven by price, they're driven by reasons other than environmental responsibility. And so predominantly still the tourism industry in support of this motion is definitely run for the profit of the businesses. It is run for the benefit of tourists who buy excellent products at a very good price. And undoubtedly, in some situations, not enough benefit accrues to local environments, local communities, although much is being done these days. And finally, I would contend that it is, as in all economic sectors, the responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility, but ultimately, if this world is going to become more sustainable, it has to be done through intervention, because in a world of liberal economies, free choice, liberalisation, it will be very difficult to achieve sustainability without intervention from government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to maintain the form of this and re-put the motion to you and get another vote. This House believes that the main beneficiaries of tourism are the industry and the consumers, and that there's little benefit for communities and their environment. How many people agree with that statement? It's an interesting result.
And the other way.
And can I ask you to vote the other way, please?
That's why the ABTA stand is empty. Okay? They're all there now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like on your behalf to thank the panel. I'd like to thank Richard and Luke. I'd like to thank Noel and Ruth and Julia and Adama. I hope you've enjoyed the debate. It wasn't actually as confrontational as I had either feared or hoped, depending on whether I thought my glass was full or half full. But thank you very much for coming. My last duty tonight is to invite you to attend the WTM WRTD networking reception, which is upstairs in Platinum 1 and runs from 5 o'clock until 6:30. For the first half an hour, there will be some free drinks provided by the BBC. So if you make your way over there, you'll be able to meet with today's award winners and a lot of other people who